Paul Revere made Boston's North End famous when he began his historic midnight ride from here in 1775. Over time, it became a melting pot of Italian-American culture. But history has mostly forgotten another extraordinary event that happened on these streets 100 years ago. January 15, 1919. A 50-foot-tall tank collapses on the Boston waterfront, unleashing a massive tidal wave.
It absolutely picks up everything in its midst. A messenger with about a 4-ton truck is delivering produce, and it gets picked up and swept right into Boston Harbor.
21 people died as a result of the disaster, including 2 children. What takes this story from the tragic to the bizarre is the contents of the tank. 2.3 million gallons of molasses. As it turns out, molasses was originally a part of the economy the Bostonians would just as soon forget.
Boston and the Northeast were heavily involved in the slave trade, the so-called triangle trade.
Ships sailed from Boston to West Africa, exchanging rum for slaves. Next stop, the West Indies, where the slaves were traded for molasses, which was then distilled into rum back in Boston as part of a continuing cycle. Fast forward to 1914 and World War I, when demand for molasses reaches an all-time high. By then, companies were converting molasses into industrial alcohol, a key component in manufacturing weapons. As historian Stephen Puleo describes in his book Dark Tide, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA, rushed to build a high-capacity tank in Boston's North End. In charge of the project, Treasurer Arthur P. Gell.
The problem is he has no architectural experience, no technical experience, is unable to read plans and blueprints, doesn't know anything about a factor of safety, and barely asks anything about any of these things.
By the time Gell locks in a location, he has only 2 months before the first large shipment of molasses is due to arrive. In the rush to finish the project, quality suffers.
The tank begins to leak almost from the beginning. So much so that children from the North End would go down to the site and scoop up molasses with their pails and bring them home. At one point, Arthur P. Gell has the tank painted the color of molasses to disguise those leaks.
After the war ends in November 1918, as the likelihood of prohibition approaches, the company switches gears to produce as much rum as possible before the 18th Amendment goes into effect. 3 months later, January 15, 1919, shortly after noon, a Boston police officer makes a routine call to headquarters.
When he hears what he describes as this tremendous rumbling, grinding sound and the rat-tat-tat of what he feels is like machine gun bullets, he turns around and he sees this tank disintegrating before his eyes, the rat-tat-tat of the rivets, thousands of rivets in the tank pulling away.
The 160-foot wide wave of molasses travels at a speed of 35 miles per hour, leveling off to a height of 25 feet. It crushes everything in its path, tearing this firehouse from its foundation, completely collapsing the first floor. The waterfront is unrecognizable. A criminal inquest finds USIA responsible for the catastrophe, but a grand jury files no charges. The only hope for justice for the victims is a civil suit.
It really is a David versus Goliath kind of situation. United States Industrial Alcohol is a large industrial corporation. Up against them are these 119 plaintiffs who are almost exclusively Irish city workers who worked for the city of Boston or Italian immigrants who worked in and around the docks.
The Massachusetts Superior Court assigns one of Boston's most well-known lawyers to oversee the case, Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Ogden. The son of an Episcopalian minister, Ogden left a lucrative law practice at age 45 to enlist in the Army. The war profoundly changed Ogden, who would later write of his fellow soldiers, "They did not give their lives so the great might have further privilege to oppress the small." The hearings take 3 long years, in part because Ogden insists each victim be heard. In a decision that changes the course of history, he finds United States Industrial Alcohol liable.
Almost everything we take for granted today in the building construction industry, that architects need to show their work, engineers need to sign and seal their plans, building inspectors need to come out and check projects. Almost every single one of those comes about as a direct result of the Great Boston Molasses Flood case.
It has been said that God uses ordinary people to carry out his extraordinary plans. Such is the case with Hugh Ogden. Although his name has been lost to history, his legacy is undeniable. Paul Strand, CBN News.